IT Security Unit for the SCQF Level 6 Diploma in Digital Applications. So, to give you a bit of a summary of this isn't a unit per se for your Diploma in Digital Applications. This award, when it's delivered by QA, requires you to go into a 1 week workshop, Office Systems, which covers a number of elements around IT security, saving things in the right place, digital communications, best methods to communicate using technology, how to install software and set up software, that sort of thing. But before you go to this class, it's a prerequisite, which means before you go to the class, you have to complete parts of some of the units which you'll complete. So when you go to that class, you will complete 5 units, but before you go there, you would have to complete 6 statements, or statements which cover 6 points, throughout 2 units in order to be able to close off those 5 units completely when you go to that class. So this isn't a unit per se, it's just the prerequisite criteria from 2 different units before you go to that Office Systems class. So that's what this unit's about. You're going to be doing criteria from 2 units, and I'm going to cover off the learning outcomes for those units. You're not going to be doing all of them, you're just going to be doing the points that we're going to cover during this video. So the first one is H3B004, which is IT and Telecom Security 2. It's 3 learning outcomes for that unit, which is understand threats to IT and telecom systems. Learning outcome 2 is understand how to protect IT systems, and outcome 3 is understand organisational procedures for system security. The second unit that we're going to look at is HD5704, Digital Information Management. 3 learning outcomes for that unit. The first is source information to meet business requirements. Criteria 2 is apply the guidelines for information management, and outcome 3 is organise and share information sources. The first unit, IT Security 2, is SCQF Level 6, and there's 8 credits for that unit. It's quite a big unit. The Digital Information Management unit is SCQF Level 6, and there's 6 credit values for that unit. So let's start with the first one for IT Security 2, which is describe common types of physical threats to systems and data. So if you think about computer systems, if you think about your computer at work, if you think about the information on there might be stored on a server, or there might be other equipment which your computer's connected to, either across the network or wired. There are a number of threats, so there's a number of things which could happen to that equipment which could damage them, which could destroy the information on them. And this question, it's essentially a question, is looking for you to describe some of the common types of physical threats to systems and data which could happen in your workplace. So it's not to say that they have happened, but it's just to say what are the common threats which could happen to systems and data within your organisation. So I'm going to go through a few examples here, but you want to make sure, again, always mention this, that what you're writing is relevant to your work role. So always strongly relate this evidence to your role by adding in how it's relevant to your role, how that might impact your organisation, something, an incident, a situation that might happen previously that you're aware of that's relevant to the point that you're making, that's within your workplace. So don't just have it theory based that this could happen, link it strongly to your workplace. So the first one is theft. Someone could come in and steal the equipment. We've got burglary, similar idea, but that is when the business is closed. We've got vandalism, so someone could come in and vandalise the equipment. This could be done during office hours, it could be a visitor, it could be employees. If you have equipment which you're allowed to take home with you, and maybe it's someone who travels about, very easy for them to neglect that equipment, just not take good care of it, bang it down when they're sitting on a table rather than placing it down properly. And that's a form of vandalism as well. Neglect there, like I've just mentioned, people just not looking after. Maybe you get a work phone and people are throwing it about, they're not putting a case on it, they've taken the case off it, the screen's getting scratched, damaged. These are physical threats to systems data. Like I said, phones could be included in this, in IT systems. That is part of IT systems. You could think mobile phones, tablets, those sorts of things as well. We've got data protection. So that could be a physical threat. So the data protection rules and any threats to the information. So it's not the hardware itself which could be damaged. It could be the information that's on there, particularly if that information is personal, if it includes people's names, addresses, dates of birth, if it includes financial information, particularly financial information that maybe belongs to someone else, then there's serious data protection issues there, and physical threats can affect that. You know, if someone comes in and steals equipment, for example, theft, then what is it they're stealing? What's on the system that they've stole? If they've stole a computer or a USB card or a mobile phone, what information can they access, and what is the impact on data protection for that? GDPR breaches, so any sort of physical breach of GDPR or data protection processes which you have is also a common threat. Bogus staff visitors, people pretending to be a contractor when they're not, just to come and steal information or computer equipment. You've also got environmental physical threats, so this is something which isn't caused by people. So it could be something such as a fire, a flood, a power cut, a temperature issue, which could all damage the computer equipment. The important thing to remember for this one is it's got to be a physical threat. It can't be a digital threat, so it can't be something that happens on the computer. It has to be something that physically happens to the computer. Okay, so next point is about your organisation's disaster recovery plan. What is your organisation's disaster recovery plan? Again, this is going to be specific to your organisation, but I just want to outline what a disaster recovery plan is, what it's all about, and why it exists. This could be useful information for producing evidence, but you're going to have to relate it to what your organisation is going to do in these situations. So, there's 3 different types of disasters which could happen. And a disaster recovery plan is designed to work out a solution should one of these events happen. But there's 3 broad types of disasters which can occur. So the first one is natural hazards. So these could be fires, they could be floods, they could be hurricanes, tornadoes, earthquakes. So that's a lot of weather related disasters. Could also be epidemics as well. So epidemics in terms of infections and viruses. That could also have an impact on your organisation. And the epidemic one is something that's been very apparent recently as well. The second main type of disaster that can happen is a technological disaster. So this is where there's been a failure of systems or structures. So it could be a pipeline explosion, transportation hazards, utility disruptions, dam failures, hazardous material releases, something technology wise. It could actually be about IT equipment itself being damaged, the cables just wearing down, the equipment being old and needing to be replaced and it hasn't been replaced, so there's a bit of neglect. And the third type is human cause, so that's active assailant attacks, chemical, biological attacks, cyber attacks. These are happening fairly frequently as well. I've worked with a number of businesses where they have identified that is something that they've been affected by. Against data infrastructure sabotage. I remember back to the news about it was the WannaCry virus, which affected a lot of NHS computers, and it essentially locked the screen, kept information, locked information, and said if they didn't pay a ransom, then they would delete all that information that was on the computer. And because it's on the network, it spread to a lot of different computers that was running Windows XP, an old operating system at the time. So that's another example of a disaster that can happen. Imagine if all the computers in your workplace got a virus on them and they couldn't access them unless they paid a large sum of money to criminals, essentially, to get their own information, access their own information. So there are control measures, and there's 3 different types of control measures that should be outlined in a disaster recovery plan. First is preventative, second is detective, and third is corrective. Okay, so the first one is what can be done now to minimise the likelihood that one of these disasters is going to occur. Okay, and if it does happen, what can be done to minimise it from happening? So anything that can be done before the event to either prevent it from happening, make it less likely to happen, or minimise the impact if it did happen. Okay, an example of that would be fire suppression equipment. sprinkler systems, fire alarms, fire extinguishers, fire hoses, fire blankets, these signs, emergency exit signs. These are all things that are put in place to try and prevent and minimise a fire should they occur. Detective is control measures which are in place to detect if the event's actually occurred. Now, a fire, that's fairly obvious, and I'd say as well, fire alarm systems, smoke detectors are part of would be a detective control measure because they would detect that has actually happened. There's lots of different examples of things to identify has the event happened. Sometimes that's one that's overlooked because you might think surely it's obvious that things happen. We must know that a disaster's occurred, but sometimes it's not apparent. It might not be apparent straight away that your computer's got a virus on it. It doesn't flag up or notify you straight away. It's not obvious. It could still be stealing data and information behind the scenes before you realise it's actually on your computer. So a detective um, method you'd use would be to have antivirus on your computer that would immediately notify you that there's a virus on your computer. And the third step would be corrective, and that would be when the event has actually happened, when a disaster has occurred. What can you do to minimise its effect after it has occurred to keep business, your organisation, continuing as close to normal as possible? It could be something like, I know a business that there was a fire in Sauchiehall Street. I was working with a business that was based in there. I was working with two businesses. One had a disaster recovery plan, and they had a backup where they could go to another site in Bells Hill. The other one didn't have one, and at very short notice they had to find office space in Glasgow city centre at the same time that a number of other offices, because the street was blocked off, so a number of other offices had to relocate as well at short notice. That would push up rent prices for office space, and so they were financially damaged by quite a bit there. It's quite a financial impact because they didn't have this plan prepared compared to the other business that did have a plan, and they were able to very quickly, with minimal disruption to their business, move to another site. Identity measures, so measures to identify if a event has occurred, and also methods to assess its impact. So this is sort of the planning tools and techniques you can use as a pestle analysis. Not go into that in too much detail, but you can look that up online quite easily. It stands for political, economic, social, technological, legal and economic. So one E is for economic, one E is for environmental on there. Pestle analysis. You can look that up online to get more information on that. You've got a SWOT analysis. That's what the wee diagram on the right there is, with the cross with the four squares. You would want to identify what the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities and the costs are of that happening. And a probability impact risk analysis, that's something else that might be carried out when you're coming up with this plan, which is to identify what the risks are, what is the probability, so what is the likelihood of that event happening. If that event did happen, what is the impact? Typically it's put on a scale, either as a percentage, as a number, so maybe on a scale 1 to 10. Multiply both together, you come up with a combined score. That way you can prioritise your tasks that you're going to start working towards putting in preventive measures. You're not going to put in preventive measures for a risk that's deemed to be very unlikely, because that would be a waste of money. But something that's quite likely to happen, you would definitely be worth spending the money on it to prevent it if it does happen, because it's something that's likely to happen, and if it does happen, it's going to have significant consequences for your business. Now, for this point, you're not going to be looking to create a disaster recovery plan. You're just wanting to know what your disaster recovery plan is and what effect it might have, what's in there, what is your disaster recovery plan for your organisation and how did it come about. So just a bit of knowledge and discussion about what your organisation's got in place. Control measures to protect information. So information is very important to an organisation. It's important that it's kept secure. Control measures are essentially things that are put into place to keep that information secure. What measures can be taken to keep information secure to prevent it from being stolen? Okay. This doesn't, unlike the first question, have to be physical. It can be digital or physical. So this has been broken up into different categories just to go through them. So we'll start with the preventative physical. So these are physical, these are things which are not done on a computer, that's done to the environment around a computer. They're physical systems and they prevent information from being stolen. So you've got CCTV systems, so you see who's coming and going, if anyone's been touching or messing about with systems that shouldn't be. Access control, Access control is about managing access, so only certain people can get into certain areas that have the equipment. If you think about a server room, that's not going to be something that's left unlocked that anyone can go in and out. That's going to have a system on there, whether it's a keypad or swipe access system to prevent people from getting into it. You've got keypad, swipe access systems. So if you think about going into an office, sometimes you might have to beep your card to let the door open so that it controls who's going in and out of certain areas that's got computer or information within them. Sign-in procedures, you know who's in the building. Motion lights, that will deter people from physically, that's a physical thing that will prevent people from going in, particularly at night, to steal information. If somewhere's got a lot of lights, it puts off burglars or people from coming to steal information. Walls and fencing, these are physical barriers. Fire suppression equipment, if the physical threat is a fire, preventative physical measure would be to have fire suppression equipment. Surge protectors, so if the threat to information, so if the information is saved on a computer or on a server and there is a surge, then that will destroy the memory that's on the computer, potentially can destroy the computer and the information that's on there. So a surge protector would prevent that electricity surge from damaging the computer equipment. An uninterruptible power supply, this is a special kind of plug where if there's a power cut, it's got battery on it as well. So as soon as the power cut happens, the battery kicks in, or sometimes it might be a generator, and it keeps the power going while there's a power cut, and that means that the power can't be interrupted to that system, and it protects information sometimes if the power's cut quickly and it's a system that you need access to. For as long as that system's down because it's not got power, you can't get access to that information. So having that bit of technology on there will keep the information secure. Preventive digitals, these are preventive measures which can be done on a computer. So these will be things such as having strong passwords, something that's not memorable, random combinations of letters and numbers, and special characters that hasn't been written down. Two-factor authentication, you see this on a lot of social media sites now where you have to supply your mobile number, so when you log in it will then send you a text with a code, and then you'll not only use your password to log in, you'll also need to put that code that's on your phone, and that's two methods of authenticating that is you. Sometimes it could be an email or a phone call. There's different systems, different ways of doing it. Antivirus, so software on there to prevent any viruses, cyber attacks. You get file folder permissions, so that's changing settings to say that only certain people can access certain files, and that means if someone gets access to your computer systems because a computer's been left unlocked, they can only access the files and the folders which that person's allowed to see. They can't see your organisation's entire folders, all their information that's on there, access to all their database systems, because even within those systems, each employee is only allowed access to certain areas that's relevant to their role, so that person couldn't access everything. Firewall, so that is settings which block certain applications, certain information from either going out onto the internet or from coming into the computer from the internet. Security updates, so that is keeping your computer up to date with the security updates. You'll see these from time to time, particularly on phones, but also on computers. Where you go to restart your computer, turn your computer on, and it says it needs to do some updates, and it's quite annoying because it needs to load for a while, and you're wanting to do something on your computer. But what happens when a organisation, so say Apple or Microsoft, create software, sometimes there's vulnerabilities in the code that hackers can exploit, and if they exploit it, they can gain access to your information. And whenever that's been identified, the organisations which produce the software will send out an update which will rectify and solve that issue, so that exploitation can't affect you. They can't steal your information using that loophole that they've found. Encryption is essentially what it is. It's rather than sending text across the wires from your laptop down the sort of phone lines onto the servers onto another computer. Rather than sending that in plain text that anyone could intercept and read, it uses an algorithm to change the plain text into a code. And the only way to change it back into plain text is to have the key, which is basically it's the key for cracking the code. It's essentially a way of being able to turn it back using the same pattern that it was used to scramble information to change into random letters, numbers and symbols. So that's what encryption is, and that means if it's intercepted and when it's being transmitted from one computer to another computer, no one can actually see what that information is. It's just random letters and numbers. It's meaningless. Secure communication is communication which uses encryption. Interestingly, emails are not secure communication when they're external. When they're internal, so when you're sending an email to one of your colleagues, that is within your organisation and it is secure and it is encrypted. But if you send an email to someone else in another organisation, it's not actually encrypted. It is stored on your email, on the email server of the internet service provider in plain text, and they can easily look at it. You know, if it's a Hotmail account, Outlook account, Microsoft can actually see in plain text the contents of that email. That's why banks, if you do digital banking, banks never send your bank statement out via an email. They'll always get you to log in to their system online, and you'll see in the address bar that it's HTTPS, it's secure, and it's encrypted. They'll never send it out an email because they know that's not secure. And RAID is essentially, if you think of it, where you've got a USB stick. A hard drive is basically a big USB stick with memory on it to save files. RAID is where you have three of these hard drives, three of these memory devices, and rather than saving it to the one, you save it across the three. So if one of those devices breaks or fails because of old age, you've still got access to the file because it's saved on the other two, and that's essentially what RAID is. So having your information saved in multiple locations means that if one of those locations are compromised, you'll still have access to that information. Corrective measures, control measures. So that is, if something's happened, how do we get back to business as usual? How do we get our business back? So something's happened to our computer systems, have all went down, all the information's been stolen or locked. Maybe, for example, that you've got that WannaCry virus and it's locked your computer. It says, if you don't pay us so much money, we're going to delete all your files. How do you get back to being able to access your files? What do you do? What tools can you use? All of this has got to do with backups, and it's just different types of backups. So backups are just additional copies of your files saved in a different place. So if one place, if the place you normally keep it is damaged, broken, stolen, whatever, you've still got another copy which you can go and access. So backups could be sent off-site at regular intervals. You could have SAN. So SAN is basically just replication of data off-site. So it's rather than having it on-site, you have a different location. And cloud solutions should be sort of aware of. It's like OneDrive or Dropbox or Google Drive. Cloud's becoming something that's been used quite a lot, and it's basically rather than you or your organization having a server where they keep all the files, you pay a company such as Microsoft or Google or Apple to use their servers or use a little part of their servers. So it's very scalable. You'll need to use what it is, the exact amount that you need to use, and you pay for it that way. And if you don't need it, you can just cancel it or reduce your package you've got with them. And the thing about using their servers is that they've got all these backup procedures. They've got all this very advanced security software and settings set up. They've got people who are employed just to make sure that those servers are secure. Whereas if you're working for a small organisation, you're not going to be able to have that capability. And if your server breaks or someone hacks into it, you're not going to have the most up-to-date, the most high-tech, secure software on there protecting it. So it's more likely to be compromised, and when it is, it's gone. So it's better to have it on the cloud where you've got for a low price all these features to keep that information secure. And if that is compromised, there's a backup of it, and that's all managed by whoever's providing your cloud storage. So describe methods for providing physical security. So these are methods to provide physical security to your systems, to your computers, to your servers, to your phones, to your laptops. We've covered a bit of this already, but we'll go through it again. You've got sign-in processes, so sign-in books, CCTV systems, locked fireproof safe, visitors badges, so you know who's a visitor who's signed in. If they don't have a visitor's badge, you can challenge, so you can say, hi, can I help you? What is it you're here for? And you could get that person to explain why it is that they're there. I've worked in a lot of organisations which are very secure, that work with government contracts or that work on defence projects, and they'll require people to have visitors badges on display. It requires staff to have them as well, but particularly visitors, they have to have a visitors badge and they have to be escorted. And if one of those two things is missing, then they are regularly trained. Every staff member is regularly trained to challenge people. Just ask them, what is it you're doing here? Who are you here to see? Why do you not have a visitor's pass? Intercom systems, so to buzz people in, so that maybe you don't have a receptionist, but the door's still got a secure entry system, so you need to press a button, buzz through, speak to whoever's in before they let you in. You can't just walk in. Security personnel that's been employed to manage entryways entrances, gates. Fire suppression equipment, again, if the threat is fire, then fire sprinklers, fire alarms, fire extinguishers, all can be used to prevent that from happening. We've got turnstiles, so in a lot of the office buildings in Glasgow, you'll see these, or in any city, you can you sort of hit your ID badge off the turnstile, and then it allows you to enter. Alarm systems, security lighting, physical barriers, and signs. Signs is one that's overlooked as well, so having signs is a good way of ensuring security to alert people the fact that there's maybe alarm systems or CCTV cameras as well. Recognising reliable information sources. So, this point is about how you recognise reliable sources of information. I've got a few examples here, so I'm firstly going to focus on emails and then I'm going to focus on websites. Now, when you're writing this, you need to focus on what you do in your organisation. Some of the points I'm going to make could be useful though to help you understand what this point is looking for you to do. So how do you recognise reliable information sources through emails? There's a few things you do. So let's use this example email here, which I have received, and it's quite obviously a scam email. So how do I know that this is a fraudulent email? This isn't from, it's pretend to be the DVLE. So how do I know that this email is not from the DVLE? Well, first of all, if I look at who it's from, it says payment dvla.gsi.gov.uk, which sort of at first glance looks like their email address, but you quickly see that's actually just the name that the person's picked for this email address, and where it's got the two little arrows pointing either way there, and it's got the email address in the middle. You'll see that the email address that's been sent from is at telenet.be. So that's obviously, if it's from the DVLA, it'd be at gov.uk. So that's obviously not from the DVLA. So that's the first thing. You can see it's very easy for people to change what you see in terms of the name, but you can always click on it and see the actual email address itself it's been sent for, because they're trying to disguise this as a DVLA email. The content of it is obviously not from the DVLA. There's no logo. Down at the bottom of the email you have normally a little footer that has certain messages and links to their website. The fonts are all off. It's not in the DVLA branding. It's quite a poor replication of what the DVLA might actually send out. So I'm reading about the content of it. The words don't make any sense. I know that my vehicle is taxed, and it's not branded. It doesn't look right. The content of it is off, and the email address is wrong. So those are things that I'm looking at to see actually this email is not from who it's pretending to be from. And if I move on to the next slide, it's another example here. This time they are pretending to be from the HMRC. That's who they're pretending to be from. You can see it's annual tax refund, and the content are talking about HMRC, but the email address you see there's at hotmail.co.uk, so that's just something someone's made up. It's a poor attempt. It's got stuff about HMRC down the bottom, but there's no actual logos, there's no branding, it's not in the HMRC fonts. The content of it is just not structured in a way that HMRC would ever send out. And looking at the content and the email address, you can see that this isn't from a reliable source. If you're thinking about something, emails you might get in the workplace, you might have received, and this is called phishing, which is where an email pretends to be from a different source to get information. I've seen ones where it's been they've looked online at Companies House, they've seen who the directors are, or they've looked on your website, and they've pretended to imitate your director's email address to send you an email about a financial report or login details or whatever it might be, bank details. And if you don't check these things, you realise it's not from a reliable source. And so you want to do these things to understand that that is not a real email address. So that's one way of looking at this. The other way to look at it is about like websites. Where can you find reliable information sources? So in that last example, in that email, any content of that, I know I'm using fraudulent emails for example. The point is it's not that it's a fraudulent email. The point is that the content within that email is not reliable or accurate. And you could be getting emails from other people and you see from the content that that is not reliable. And the same for websites. How would you find information online that's reliable? How would you ensure that information sent in that email was reliable? How would you verify both who sent it and the accuracy of the information? And if you're to look for information online, how would you decide what a reliable source is? So it's kind of what I mentioned there, just to finish up on this email thing, just before I move on to the websites. And the 3 steps I've mentioned is check an email address, ensure it's from a legitimate email address, check the content of the email, and if you're unsure, press the phishing button or escalate it to your IT service desk. So if we move on now to what we're saying about websites, so there's different websites out there where you can find information. So how do you know that the website, the information you find online is reliable, is accurate? So there's certain ways you can go about this. An example I'll use is the difference between using a proper government statistics website and looking on a website which anyone can change. So on the left I've got the Office for National Statistics, a screenshot of their homepage where they have information on employment, inflation, GDP, population figures. That information is going to be accurate because the Office for National Statistics has a strong reputation for producing accurate and audited information. Whereas the one on the right, Wikipedia, anyone with an account can edit that information, so it's not going to be 100% accurate, and you would not rely on it. If you're looking something up, generally speaking, you're not relying too much on it, then by all means, Wikipedia is a quick place to find that information. But you wouldn't base some serious business decision that's worth a lot of money or big impact based on information found on Wikipedia. You'd want to go and you'd want to find a reliable source, and the government source for this example is more reliable. So think about a time where you've had to find information online. What have you done to ensure that the website and the information you've found online is reliable? There are a lot of different things you can do here, from checking the web address, making sure it's a real company. Normally in the footer of a website or in the About Us section, it's got the company number. You can look up the company number, the company name on Companies House, and that tells you the registered address. So you want to make sure it's got a proper business address. You can look up on Google Maps, make sure it's a real place. You can check out the directors, make sure that they are real people. There'll be social media accounts, there'll be other things you can verify that that's a proper business. So there's lots of different tools and techniques that you can use. So think about in the workplace what you've done to verify the information that you're using online is reliable. Some other tips: check the URL of the website. You can see here this is Google, but it's got HTTPS, so that means that the connection is secure. If it's not got that, it means it's not an encrypted connection, and the information can be hacked. And it's probably not going to be a real website usually as well. Any serious website, any professional website will have the HTTPS security. Check the content of the website. If the content of the website seems off, then it is probably going to be off. If it doesn't seem right, if it seems too far out there, that is probably the case, and I would check from other sources, and if it doesn't match up with other sources, it's not accurate information. Verify the company number of the company's house. I mentioned that already. Check the HTTPS is there, and that ensures that your connection, when you're looking up the information, is encrypted, and the website's got a valid security certificate. You also want to check multiple sources, so you wouldn't want to just rely on the one source. You could check from different sources to confirm that the information is accurate. So if you see the same numbers on 3 different websites, and 3 websites are reliable sources, you are saying that is definitely correct, that information. Organising and storing information. So what are your organisational rules for storing and saving information? Never save anything to your desktop. If you save stuff to your desktop, it's only stored on your computer, your machine. You want to, where possible, save your information on a place that's backed up. So on a OneDrive, onto SharePoint, onto a shared drive, somewhere that's not just on your computer. If your computer's stolen or it breaks, that information is gone. Never hold on to confidential information. So if you have to download as part of a process information which is confidential, you want to, once you've processed it and uploaded it to the right place or sent it on to whatever you need to do, you want to delete that local copy of that confidential information. You don't want to keep it for unnecessary information. And it's the same if you're doing it paper-based, you want to shred it. Never keep passwords in Word documents or written anywhere else. We're saying Word documents because for this evidence we want to focus on things you're doing on the computer. Save it as a correct file type. So if you're saving information, you want to make sure it's saved as correct file type, whatever file type that you need to use for your process. You won't be using workplace example system. You won't be talking about what you do in your role. So save it as the correct file type. If it's a PDF, it's .pdf. If it's a Word doc, it's .doc. Spreadsheet.xls. Images.png. .jpeg. If it's a text file, it's .txt. So you want to be saving things as the correct file type, and you also want to name the file appropriately. So when you're conducting processes in your business, you'll be told when you're trained to do that process that there's usually a certain naming structure, and that's so that other people can quickly look up the documents or the files that you're working on if they need to access it. So always follow the correct naming standards. So that's it. Otherwise, you end up with a folder, lots of different files, named differently, and you can't quickly and effectively find that information. One of the benefits of using a computer to store information is that you can quickly search for information, but you can't do that if it's not named in a standardized way. You also want to save files in the correct location. I mentioned a little bit about this from the first point, is you don't save things to your desktop. Save files in the correct location, and typically this will be in a shared drive, somewhere that's backed up, somewhere that's secure and requires passwords to enter it. Not anyone can just access that file, that location. Keep the information secure. Never save confidential information, always save confidential information with a password. So if there's confidential information on there, when you go to save something, so if it's a Word or spreadsheet, you click File, Save As, you've got the file name, the box below the file name is the document type, so that's where you can check it's the correct file type. Sometimes you can change it, so if it's a Word document, you can save it's a PDF, and there will be an option there as well for setting a password for it. And you can set a password for it to keep the confidential information secure, so that even if someone does get access to the location, they can't access that particular file. Access privileges, that is about who can access a folder. So if you're saving in the right place, that folder will only allow certain people to access it, won't allow everyone to access it. Shred paper any confidential waste once it's done, and if it's digital, you need to delete it. Make sure it's not just in the recycle bin, it has been deleted. You'd create backups and you follow your backup procedure, and that's normally tied into the locations as to where you'd save it. Again, always remember when I'm talking about this, I'm talking about it in vague terms to give you ideas of what the criteria is looking for, but you need to make sure when you're writing about this, it's very relevant to your role. So managing access to information in your workplace, it is important that you can quickly access all of the files that you need to. However, it is also important that those very same files are protected, and that others, even others in your office who don't need access to those files, can't. So how is it set up so that that is the case? What ways in your workplace are there to ensure that you can quickly access those files but others can't? Think about how they are protected so that others can't change the contents or delete the information. So this is going to be things such as admin rights, having passwords on it, or permissions so that only certain people with certain usernames or certain accounts can access that information. So even if you have the password, you still can't access it because you're not allowed to access it. Not got permission. Don't send any confidential information over email. External emails are not encrypted, and we've already discussed that. Confirm a caller's identity before communicating private confidential information. So if someone's phoning you up asking you to discuss something about their personal details, about an appointment that they have made, about their information on the system, always confirm their identity. Even if you've spoken to them before and you think it's the right person, always double check by asking them questions that only they would know. Physical access, have physical control measures in place, and again we've already mentioned them earlier on, examples of what they could be. So things like keypads, keys kept in a lockbox. If it's a filing cabinet, you lock it with a key and you put that key into a lockbox with the other keys for the other filing cabinets, and that way only certain people know the key for the code for the box to get access to it, and that's a way of keeping it physically secure. Fingerprint scanners, swipe cards as well. So those are all examples of keeping access to information secure. So for this particular criteria, think about what information you deal with, and think about what processes are in place, both physical and digital, which manage access to that information, ensure only the right people can access it quickly, but those who don't have to access it can actually get physical or digital access to that information. And thanks a lot for listening. That concludes the content for this particular unit.